we're looking at Gwen Swinburne is asking what difference will Biden make to defense? I wonder if you could take that. I don't know who wants to take that first.
Can we do 2 or 3 questions together and then we can?
Yeah, okay. I'll group. Brian Anderson asking about is promised additional government funding getting to the front line. Michael Veal is talking about what can the Royal Navy do actively to enhance British merchant navy trading all around the world, British merchant navy trading all around the world. And I can group this in, I think, Graham Erdley talking about the future of NATO will be under a Biden administration. Will the EU nations pay their 2%, as Trump was asking? I should say, as when I was an MEP, I did actually push a German MEP to increase their contribution from 1.6% and felt rather concerned afterwards at actually encouraging German rearmament, but that's a different stage. So please fire away on that. Do you want to go first, Colonel, or?
I'm happy to, yeah. I mean, I think on the Biden question, we're pretty clear on what Biden's attitude is likely to be in general terms, because he was the vice president, he was part of Obama's administration. They had a certain stance, and I think we've seen what it is. I think his defense secretary, General Austin, who I had the pleasure to know in Afghanistan, is a man who is very enthusiastic about alliances, and I think he will be, as well as President Biden, I think General Austin will be looking to put a lot of emphasis on NATO, and I think the same question is going to be coming to national leaders in NATO about how much they spend and don't spend. So I don't think they're going to get off the hook there because Trump's not breathing down the neck, and equally Obama had the same issues he raised himself. I think there are questions about the Middle East, perhaps more than broader issues, which I think one of the key issues is the Iranian nuclear project, which of course President Obama brought in with the P5+1, brought in the JCPOA, the nuclear deal, which actually served to pave the way to an Iranian nuclear weapon. Unfortunately, President Trump pulled out of it. I think we wanted to pull out of it as well, but didn't want to be seen to go along with Trump and against the more broad EU perspective. But I think that's an area that needs to be of concern to us, because I think, I would slightly disagree with Julian in as much as he says, while we have our own nuclear deterrent, that will keep us safe from nuclear blackmail. I agree with that wholeheartedly in terms of rational actors. I'm not sure if you have a nuclear armed Iran that mutual assured destruction or anything like it is going to work quite so effectively. So I think that's an area that we need to be slightly more careful of. As far as funding getting to the front line is concerned, we will have to see. I think a lot of emphasis on funding will be on technology and space projects and cyber. I think that's where a lot of the priority is going to land. And as Julian said quite rightly before, these new capabilities are, as well as hard kinetic capabilities, that we also need. And I believe that it's likely that the army, for example, is going to be cut very soon, significantly cut, in an announcement that will be coming sometime in the spring. So if that is the front line, then no, I don't think those funds are going to get at that front line. I think they go more in the ether where they're needed, but they're also needed on the front line. I don't really have any comments to make on the Navy trading question. You'll be pleased to hear.
Julian,
I go next. Yes, I certainly accept that countries like North Korea and Iran are less stable than the superpowers, but nevertheless, even the most unstable power structures, when it comes to the threat of nuclear annihilation, I think tend to tend to, shall we say, sober up a little bit in the face of what is, and this is why its deterrent effect is so persuasive, the difference between a conventional balance of power is you can have rough equality between the contending conventional forces, and yet through superior generalship or whatever, equipment and so on maybe, but even if it was well balanced, you can never be sure that one side won't completely vanquish the other. The difference with the nuclear weapon is not only is its destruction unacceptable, it is unavoidable. And it's quite interesting, in fact, that I can remember at a time when India and Pakistan were constantly at loggerheads with one another, and they were having serious military clashes. And I remember when one and then the other exploded a nuclear weapon, we were being told in the House of Commons by quite experienced politicians saying, this is a terrible disaster for the world, and it's very much a less safe place. Strangely enough, I think they have had to take their mutual security in a lot steadier fashion, even though they still have issues with each other, since they realized that they had the ability to wipe each other out than before. But it's open to argument. Let's put it one way. There's one thing we can certainly agree on, and that is that any country like ours, any democracy that's foolish enough unilaterally to get rid of its nuclear weapons would be laying itself open to a situation which would be extremely vulnerable. On the question of the difference to be made by Joe Biden, I think I tried to put as good a face as I could on the advent of Trump. I realized that there was at least a possibility that by him taking such a tough line with NATO countries, European NATO countries, on their failure to invest enough in defense, he might do NATO a service by getting them to invest more. But unfortunately, at the back of one's mind all the time was the suspicion that Donald Trump didn't really want America to be out there protecting weaker countries and other democracies at all, and that he was much more in the isolationist tradition of American politics. Now, you can be too interventionist, as Tony Blair demonstrated, and as David Cameron did to some extent in Libya, and would have done in Syria as well if a number of us hadn't stopped him. But the alternative is even worse. The extreme alternative of isolationism is even worse, because then you get drawn in to multinational conflicts on terms that are out of your control. And I think Biden is probably much more of an Atlanticist, and we ought to be grateful for that. I hope he will continue to put pressure on the European NATO countries, who should realize that 2% is not a target, it is a minimum. And the problem that I used to have in having these debates in Parliament about what we were spending or not spending on defense was that people kept talking about it as if it was a target, when historically we'd never dropped anywhere near to spending as low as 2%. And the fact that it was even in question was appalling. And by the end, although officially, according to NATO calculations, round about 2018, we were spending 2.1%, but on the basis on which we used to calculate it, we were already down to 1.8%. And so when we're asked, will the additional funding find its way to the front line? The answer has to be a lot of it won't, partly because, as Richard says, it will go into different dimensions, but also there is a pretty huge equipment black hole that, if there had not been an injection of money of this magnitude, would have led to even more profound cuts than those, regrettably, that we saw in that terrible defence review of 2010. Finally, on the question of whether the Royal Navy has the idea of helping the Merchant Navy in training, it's not something I've heard about, but now that I have, I think I'll put down a parliamentary written question, and the questioner will be able to have a look at my website where there's a section showing those, and he'll be able to see what sort of an answer I get.